And good evening. Today is still Thursday, July 22nd, 2021, and I am still your host, Evan George, and welcome to Bostopia Nightly News, where I go off whenever I feel like it on whatever I feel about it, with very little structure or advanced planning. But for tonight, this is going to be a little bit of a standard old school nightly episode. I have finally tracked down the Responsible Development Coalition's hearing on housing. And the reason that is so pertinent is there has been a big conversation that people like myself who have been saying that Michelle Wu is really the only or the best candidate for affordability on housing have been wrong. And that besides the commitment to rent control, which to me is a massive besides, but let's just move that to the side for a moment. Beside the issue on rent control, there is not much separating Kim Janey and Andrea Campbell and Michelle Wu from their stances on housing. Though it has to be said again and again that rent control and a candidate's willingness to openly support it is a very big deal. But since I knew this forum occurred maybe 2 weeks ago, it took me a while to track down the footage of it. I wanted to play it. Let's hope that rain's not too loud. And give Andrea and Kim Janey a second look where it comes to housing. Before I do that, though, there was some late-breaking news I wanted to talk about in terms of the Massachusetts House finally passing sports betting, and because two different state representative offices reached out to me about my thoughts on how they should vote or what would be a left critique either for or against the measure, I figured why not share some thoughts here. Oh wow, it's really coming down. And let me preface this all by saying I know, and I'm sure if you listen to this or watch this, you know as well, State Representative Erica Idahoven voted against the measure. And she is someone I have nothing but love and respect for. Though I disagree with the vote, I completely understand her rationale for voting no. But the reason that I support passing this is one, and maybe it's primary, I like to bet on sports. It's fun. I like the adrenaline. It's tough to say I'm good at it, but I think I've made more money than I've lost at something which is ultimately just luck. But from my position, the reason I advised people to vote yes on it is a few different factors. The first being that we already have sports betting here in Massachusetts, except what we do is we call it fantasy. And because we outlawed traditional sports betting, I don't even know how long ago, decades. And then the advent of fantasy came along, we decided not to extend it, not to extend that protection. So we've still allowed fantasy sports betting, which is exactly the same thing as regular sports betting, just not as fun. There's no more skill involved or anything. It's just a different way of doing it. I don't like. I'll play fantasy football with my buddies, but in terms of the daily stuff, if you've ever looked at it, it's not for me. Let's put it that way. It's almost like betting, except you also get entered into a raffle or a lottery against other people and how well they bet. That's a different tangent. Primary focus is that we already have sports betting. And having this dumb legal distinction between allowing fantasy sports betting but not letting traditional sports betting, to me, is nonsense. But the second reason is just the revenue. We're going to charge them $5 million per license. I think then an additional $1 million per year. That's going to generate, I think on some estimates I've read, an additional $70 million a year to use for public spending. Let's do it. I understand the critiques that this is ultimately going to be managed by large corporations like DraftKings, like Encore Casino. And of course, I would absolutely love if the state could design its own app, maybe something through the state lottery. And I think there's still a window to do that. If I was representative, that would have been an amendment to create a publicly funded operation for sports betting. Why are we letting some corporations make off with what'll be millions upon tens of millions of profit? Let's keep even more, but that's not the world we live in. Wasn't the world we live in with marijuana when we decided to legalize that. We knew that was going to go to corporations and not be publicly managed or in any sort of a small business way managed. And so for me, that was not a good enough reason not to legalize something. And maybe in the third and final point is I can already bet on sports if I want to. I can, and I have the means to do so. I can drive up to New Hampshire whenever I want, place my bets, and leave. Not everyone has that luxury. Some people are at the whim of their local bookie. And when those things go south, it's a lot more violent than if you don't have enough money in a DraftKings deposit to place a bet. So those are my initial thoughts. I am more than open to critiques. I think it's a good conversation to have. I think there are only 3 no votes, so this is going to get passed. But if anyone on the left would like to explore it further, I think it is, again, I'm more than open to criticism on my take on it. And besides that, the only little thing that I wanted to say as a warm-up to what will be this video on housing that I'll listen to, I don't know, up until I get a little bored, is about the future of the BPDA. Because just about every candidate has said that the seaport is a catastrophe. Just about every candidate says that reforms need to be done at the BPDA. And it almost echoes what I hear with the Boston Police Department from last year. You can say a generic term like reforms, and it doesn't mean much to most people. And hello to Frank and Sandra watching at home. I can see your little text pop up. And the one issue I wanted to talk about that have everyone's radar with the BPDA is the fact that it is internally self-funded. And the reason that that is the actual source of their power, and if any reforms to the BPDA are going to be anything meaningful, you have to remove their separate funding mechanism. And as a gateway to get you there, quickly talk about a gentleman named Robert Moses. So if you follow housing at all, you have come across Robert Moses at some point in your reading. He is a historical figure. I think there was a Pulitzer Prize-winning book called The Power Broker written about him from the New York Port Authority, absolutely. 1930s, so I think maybe the 1950s or 60s were the height of his power. And he is compared to figures like Allen Dulles, who managed this CIA. His brother was at State. Douglas MacArthur, who basically, I think at one point had a fifth of the world's population under his control when he was our commander in the Pacific. And then Robert Moses is in that conversation in terms of autonomy of power. Obviously at a different scale because he was New York City. But he completely gutted, rooted, redirected, mangled the island of Manhattan, displaced countless poor communities, black communities, Hispanic communities, all over the island, all for the construction of highways, of luxury development, and turning it from something which once was a community area of Manhattan, and then transforming it into the corporate rich playground that it is today. And he did all of this. He had the ability to do all of this through development because he made himself immune to public pressure. He made himself immune to anything involving politics, any city councilors or governors. And the reason he was immune to those pressures was because I think at one point he had like 10 different titles. He's also the reason the Dodgers left New York. I think that was Bernie Sanders' crowning political awakening was as a child when his Dodgers went to L.A. and then he learned all about dynamics of power. That's absolutely right, Peak. And one of the positions that he managed was the Tri-Borough Bridge, basically the 3 bridges that go into Manhattan. And he was able to, through tolls, have a completely separate funding mechanism, which means he did not need to get his money through the city government. And if you have your own separate funding mechanism, you are, again, immune to democracy. You are immune to democratic pressure. The only thing that our representatives actually have tangibly is the power of the purse. The executive, they get the guys with the nightsticks. But Robin Moses was immune to that pressure. He had his own funding mechanism. And the reason I keep saying that is because the BPDA, the Boston Planning Development Agency, they have their own separate funding mechanism. And that is what allows them to be insulated. It's why they can go to public hearings and say, here's what we're doing. If you don't like it, F off. Or they can be completely immune to any city councilor, any mayor, because they don't need the budget. They got their own money coming in. They get to collect revenues off of the city-owned properties to pay for their own operations. And so any true reform of the BPDA has to rip that heart out. And that heart is, again, their separate funding mechanism. I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the future. I'm going to probably maybe do a deeper dive into Robert Moses, if people want me to. Before we get to the fun part, which is me relaxing, yelling at the mayoral candidates, a quick pitch being, if you have not already, if you're watching me on TikTok, hello, I recommend switching to Twitch because then you can actually watch the visuals. You don't just see me and my gigantic Yeti microphone. If you are watching this on anyone, like, subscribe, share, retweet. Also, I put my Venmo in the link tree. People in the past have asked how to financially support me, and I am accepting $4 donations so that I can buy a beer, or if you are under 21, buy myself a cup of coffee. But if you cannot do that, I fully understand. I want to make all this content free. However, I do enjoy beer and coffee. And with that, let's now go to our mayoral candidates. And what I'm going to do now is a little bit different than what I was doing before. And what I mean by that is, for the purposes of today, I might do this in the future as well. Completely skip John Barros, because I'm sorry, he doesn't have a chance of winning. He also doesn't have any notable or unique views, I hate to say, where it comes to any policy does he stand out on. And for the purposes of today, I'm also going to skip Anissa Sabi George, because I know that she's the worst on housing. What the purpose of this exercise is to look at Kim Janey, Michelle Wu, and Andrea Campbell and be able to clearly separate what distinguishes them on housing. Though, again, I have to stress primarily the two issues, and they are massive, is Michelle Wu favors rent control. Also, she explicitly says abolish the BPDA, while everyone else uses weaker language like reform. But as all some progressive endorsements start heading towards Kim Janey, I want to be able to clearly articulate their differences on housing. So that is tonight's experiment, while I'm going to relax a little bit. And hello, Spanish sass. I don't know if you want me to say your real name or not. But all right, let's give it a listen.
So you've all signed a pledge put out by the Responsible Development Coalition for responsible real estate development. And I'm quoting from the pledge, pledging to create good paying jobs, incorporating inclusivity and equal pay, increase affordable and workforce housing, promote environmentally sustainable building, provide job training, engage in robust community outreach, and work to prohibit the misclassification of workers and payroll tax fraud. That's a lot that you've all pledged to do. What does that pledge mean to you? And I know you only have 1 minute to respond, but maybe you can take one of those things and say, how are you going to do that?
All right, free advice to everyone. If you ever have a pledge, don't waste your time in asking people, do you pledge to support good jobs? Or do you pledge to make smart decisions? Because it is silly. Because you don't gain anything from it. There's not a single political candidate which is going to say, oh, no, I'm against good jobs. No, I'm against smart development. You have to pick a very specific, concrete policy, even something ideally that you already know what they're going to say ahead of time, a vote which is coming up. However, let's listen to those three with their responses.
It is a lot, and I recognize that, and I think I committed to all of it because all of it's equally important, right? It is about creating jobs, it's about creating contracts, especially for businesses run by women, people of color as well, LGBTQ. It is about making sure that as folks are working, their wages go up over time. It's also about making sure we're responding to the housing crisis, dealing with issues of climate, you name it. If I'm blessed to become the next elected mayor, there's a few things I would do to make sure this happens. One, in my cabinet, there would be someone from a labor background who would be coordinating all of this. I've also committed to establish an Office of Labor Standards, which I think is critically important, particularly as we talk about wage theft, or frankly, if you are in a union or if you're trying to get into a union, you need a place to go to navigate that process. So I've committed to that as well. I got 15 seconds. In addition to that, also looking at our city-owned lands as one way. I started a vacant lot initiative in the city of Boston. There are thousands of city-owned lots in the city of Boston. I pledge as mayor that my first 100 days, I would activate 100 of those lots that would meet all of this. And I think there's a way to do that working in partnership with the stakeholders and the unions in this space.
All right, the only thing I wanted to weigh in on, because this is something that I'm getting a little nervous about, and that is the amount of counselors. Frank Baker, I think, also supports initiatives like this, which keep pointing out how much empty city-owned land there is. Because generally, whenever, in the last 50 years, unless you are a very small sliver of left electeds, whenever you talk about doing something with city land, what you are talking about is selling it to private equity, selling it to a developer or to a landlord, generally at a discounted rate to allow them to build on it. And we have to be 1,000% against the transfer of property from the public into private hands. Always, at all times. That is almost a golden rule that we have to be against. It is in the direct opposite interest of the people to continue to privatize land. And so, I am not saying that is what Andrea is stating here, but it is very worrisome how much candidates all the way to the right, like Frank Baker, and others keep highlighting the city-owned land, discussing what we need to do with it, because generally speaking, 99.9999 times out of 100, they want to sell it to private equity. Just needed to raise that red flag. And again, I'm not saying that's what Andrea was saying. Maybe she has a much better plan, but... They're whispering to each other.
Hello, everyone. So when it comes to responsible development, there was a great example just this morning. I had the opportunity to go to the topping off ceremony for a building in the North End. And this development happened because of labor. This is a union-built building in a collaboration with a number of trades unions. And that is the way we get there. It offers us good jobs. It makes sure that we're doing development right in the city of Boston. We have not only the opportunity to do so, but a responsibility to make sure that we're creating pathways, not just for the folks who already have good jobs, but for our young people in Boston to get these jobs, whether that is through Madison Park, whether that is through Ben Franklin Institute, and other ways that we create those pipelines. We certainly can also work to expand building pathways, but this was a great example of what it looks like to do responsible development. And as mayor, I will keep doing that. Thank you so much.
Also, it's been a while since I watched one of these. I miss how Kim Janey will mention her being mayor in just about every answer, and that is what she's supposed to do. This is not a generic knock on her. It is just a funny little garnish. Okay, we're gonna skip John Barros. Sorry, TikTok.
Appreciate the question.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
For all of us to participate.
Healthy, just
I'm gonna go back to Michelle.
we need to do this work in
We're gonna skip Anissa because we already know I'm not gonna like what she says. That's not the point of the exercise.
For me, responsible development, first and foremost, is about doing right by our people, making sure that the situations our workers are going into are safe and healthy, just like the buildings that are going up. That our city is a place where families can stay and raise their kids and know that their kids will be able to afford to come back and buy a home in the communities they grew up in. That dream is getting further and further away in our city. And so we need to lean into the power that we have through city government, not just to wait for state changes or federal government, but to use what we have. I'm proud to have been part of work on the city council, pushing for the city of Boston to do everything we can to hold companies, bad actors, violators accountable for wage theft, to make sure that we are tracking and monitoring the numbers when it comes to the Boston Jobs Residency Policy, to ensure that in every way we are including everyone. I come from an immigrant family. I know the barriers that are for so many of our workers, and I will fight to make sure we lean and use everything in our power.
So I think there's like one person in the audience who keeps trying to clap after each response. You don't need to do that, especially when they just are given a generic question. Did not learn much from Michelle there. But all right, what's the next question?
This question goes first to you, Ms. Janie. Earlier this week, there was a report put out by the state about the future of work. And it had a lot of implications for the city of Boston, it would seem. They predicted that over the next decade, demand for office space could drop 20%. Commuter rail traffic, people coming into the city, could decline between 15 and 50%. Airline passengers coming into the state from elsewhere for business is going to, they predict, will decline dramatically. And 1/3 of Massachusetts workers could do their jobs remotely, which may really affect the influx and outflux, and people in and out of Boston every day. Does this make you stay up at night worrying about what's going to happen to the economy in Boston, or do you think this is overblown?
Oh,
There is no
what is with
question
these questions?
that we are coming out of the darkest days of COVID, and we need to make sure that we are meeting this moment with a fierce urgency.
Well, I got to pause there, and I will quickly stipulate that this forum is like at least 2 weeks old. We are not out of the darkest days of COVID. Our numbers have increased. I think it's 480% over the last 2 weeks. So, but however, again, when Janie made the statement, she didn't know that. Just needed to state it for the record.
To ensure our economy is strong and that it is in fact equitable. There's also no question that workplace may change for some. A lot of folks, like the folks in this room, are not sitting home on Zooms. They are working, doing the work every single day. And so while there may be some flexibility in the workplace, we know that Boston will continue to be strong and vibrant because that is what we are going to do together. I've created a chief of labor and workforce development to make sure we are tackling the future of workplace, not just within City Hall, but throughout the city of Boston. We also have to make sure that there is a reason for folks to continue to come into our city. It is not just about the people who come in from other places to work every day, but it is everyone who wants to utilize our city. And we are doing that work together right now as mayor. Thank you.
Yep, see, ended it again, doing that work right now as mayor. I really don't like this question, but I will let everyone, or at least the candidates that we care about.
That's an honor.
All right, thank you.
The rest of the world how it's done.
Thank you. Flipping to Michelle.
The future of our, no question.
I know this is annoying. I do not apologize.
To make sure that we are able to respond to the needs going forward. The world has changed after what we have all lived through, and there is no question that the next mayor and her administration are going to have a huge impact on what
The next mayor in her administration, John Barros, just leave. You're embarrassing yourself.
the growth and future of our city looks like for decades and generations to come, way beyond the end of the term. So we need to do what Boston does best, which is to lean into the opportunity to be ahead of where the curve is and show the rest of the world how it's done. In this moment of huge uncertainty, when we're not sure what our downtown commercial office market will look like, when we're not sure what everything will come back as. Now is the moment actually to reach back and tackle the challenges that our residents were facing long before the COVID-19 virus, to think about how we get more housing and affordable housing in there, to get on-site childcare in each one of our commercial office buildings so working parents can do that juggle and actually make it back into work in person. Boston will always be a city where we can't miss out on what's happening here. We need leadership and partnership to make sure that we are ahead of that curve.
I like the echoing before COVID, but again, this question is
I will
somewhat
say,
meaningless.
you said what keeps me up at night. The number one issue right now that keeps me up at night is the opioid crisis of mass and cats. And I have to name that because as we sit in here, that gets worse every single second. The other things that keep me up at night is the inequities. I have 2 boys who live in Mattapan. We have a 5% chance of getting them into high-quality Boston public schools. We know, of course, wage stagnation is real. We know, of course, people are struggling to live in this city. It's quite expensive. All of this, the racial wealth gap, those also keep me up at night. But the best thing about the city of Boston is we have the ecosystem. We have the labor, the workers, the organizations, the institutions, and we have a $4 billion city budget, a robust private sector. We're inventing vaccines. Everything would take to close all of those gaps, and of course, to activate those spaces. We can activate them for housing, mixed development. I was just on with an organization this morning that is helping youth who are homeless have access to jobs. They need space. Well, we can help them get that space. So I'm not concerned about the space. We can definitely activate those spaces. The question is, are we at this moment in time going to come together as a larger city and community to close those gaps and to, of course, address what we're seeing at Boston Cast?
All right, that's actually a very good lesson for anyone who wants to work on campaigns or run for office. If you're given a somewhat dumb softball question that the 4 people ahead of you just answered blankly, just don't even answer the premise of the question and pivot to something more important. So Andrea just went with, no, yeah, that keeps me up at night. You know what else keeps me up at night? Mass and Cass. I'm not going to talk about that. That was a very good political pivot because there's 5 people on stage. You all get a minute. You got to spend that time to actually differentiate yourself, especially someone like Andrea who is polling in 4th place out of this race. But that was a good lesson on how she handled that. All right, Chris, you got one more question, and then I'm playing Resident Evil 7
Charles, you're
or
gonna
8.
start with this
I think it's 8.
question. So one of the big challenges for Boston is the high cost of living here, and housing is a huge part of that, particularly for first-time home buyers to try and get into this market. It's extremely difficult.
Don't be about first-time home buyers.
In the pledge to increase affordable and workforce housing, how are you going to do it? And in numbers that will really have an impact.
Yeah, right. Great.
All right. I mean, the short answer to this question is if he is just speaking about first-time home buyers and housing, how can you do that in numbers that will actually have an impact? You can't. It is 100% impossible. It is a simple question of math and ability to grow and scale that you cannot have a realistic solution to our housing crisis by focusing on home ownership, period. It cannot be done. It cannot be done at any city. I don't think there's enough space to get it done in a rational and equitable way in any state. The suburbs are one of the most wasteful creations of this country. It cannot be done. Private home ownership is one of the most disastrous elements of the 20th century, which is basically locking in all of the worst outcomes that we're seeing right now. And the idea that the state is going to be able to send a couple more vouchers and a couple more lifeboats and make it maybe a little bit easier for people just on the cusp of home ownership to get there, that is going to be a realistic solution you can do on scale. It cannot be done. But the only people who vote are homeowners and maybe renters that are dreaming to become a homeowners. So every single candidate, and this is true including the left candidates that I support, will mention something about pathway to home ownership. But I am telling you, it is a lie. It cannot be done. Maybe a couple extra $1 million, here you go. But it is not a realistic solution to the housing crisis. You have to decommodify housing, public housing, social housing, communal housing. Only way you can do it in cities to keep roofs over people's heads, to the fact that it's not spending 40, 50, 60, 70% of their monthly income on rent.
A huge part of what drives me to do whatever I can to give into the city
Also, they're all homeowners. Every single person running for mayor.
is knowing how much Boston has given me and my family, that I get to live in a 2-family home in Rosendale, upstairs with my husband and 2 boys, and send them downstairs to live with, to have breakfast with grandma every morning, and to be in a situation where we were able to scrape and scramble and put every penny together to buy our home, and to know that not 6 months, a year later, we would not have been able to afford that same exact place in that same neighborhood. That is how quickly housing prices are going up in Boston. And so many of our workers in the city are going to work every day building buildings and homes that our workers will never be able to afford to live in. We need to use every bit of city power to build more affordable housing, use city land, use the federal relief funds to increase homeownership. And just a word on rent control and stabilization. This is important to recognize. We cannot be building a city where families of color get pushed out. We need to step up. I'm proud to stand for rent control and rent stabilization as a tool of the city of Boston with everything else, so that we will be the city we dream of with people from every income level.
Oh, love it. Love it. Speak the truth.
I grew up in Roxbury in public housing, right behind 1850 Washington, and then affordable housing. I'm a first-time homeowner in Mattapan. I remember when I bought my home, I sat in my house and I shed tears. My husband did not, because he grew up in a home. I know what it means to be able to build your wealth through your home and to have a home. I have always worked with a sense of urgency on these issues. My first piece of legislation was the Community Preservation Act. It's generating $20 million every single year for affordable housing. I brought in a program into the Boston Housing Authority that is moving people out of poverty into homeownership opportunities. Vacant lot initiative in the city of Boston. I was just on Bloomfield Ave. I started that project where now the city put out
That is such a lie.
RFPs for 30 Bloomfield Ave lots.
I'm going to back up because I feel bad that I interrupted her. That's not the point of this exercise. But the idea that, like, on scale, we're going to take people from poverty and put them into home ownership, I'm sure there are absolutely some success stories, some outliers, and those are the ones that will get the press, like the Disney movie, to make you believe in the American dream. But the idea that you can do that on scale it's just it's not true. But I apologize to Andre. I should not have interrupted.
I shed tears. My husband did not, because he grew up in a home. I know what it means to be able to build your wealth through your home and to have a home. I have always worked with a sense of urgency on these issues. My first piece of legislation was the Community Preservation Act. It's generating $20 million every single year for affordable housing. I brought in a program into the Boston Housing Authority that is moving people out of poverty into homeownership opportunities. Vacant lot initiative in the city of Boston. I was just on Bloomfield Ave. I started that project where now the city put out 30 RFPs for 30 Bloomfield Ave lots. As mayor, I would continue that leadership, and it wouldn't change. And so in my housing plan, I talk about we have to streamline processes. We have to shift the culture in the response time at ISD. It's time consuming to build affordable housing. And the longer we take, it's more expensive. So I propose removing affordable housing from the Article 80 process, and of course, creating more jobs and expanding upon that vacant lot initiative to do 100 city-owned lots within 100 days in my first 100 days of office, and ensuring that those jobs, of course, go to the very folks in this room.
So I grew up in subsidized housing. My very first apartment, I was able to get with a Section 8 voucher. When I bought my house in 1999, I was able to do that through a first-time home buyers program. I understand the challenges that many residents in Boston face because I've lived them. That is why, as mayor, I invested $2.4 million
Another time as mayor.
so that we could triple the assistance for people wanting to buy their home. For first-time home buyers.
Very quickly, $2.4 million. The median price of a home in Boston is, I believe, over $700,000. It's called $700,000. So 2.1 million, that's 3 homes. 3.
Who are income eligible, they now can receive up to $40,000 in down payment assistance. That is up from $10,000. We need to invest even more in homeownership because that is, in fact, how we close the wealth gap in Boston, and that is how we stabilize our communities.
Cannot be done.
And make sure that everyone has the opportunity to live out the American dream.
Cannot be done. All right, those are the 3. Cannot be done. It is a lie. It polls great. It makes homeowners feel good. It makes renters feel like they have a shot at the dream. Cannot happen. But anyway, that's the show for tonight. I will maybe quickly scan the future. And by that, I mean the remaining 20 minutes on this to see if there's anything worthwhile. If there is, we'll share it. I didn't hear anything through that which really differentiated the candidates in the way that I was hoping. You would think the Municipal Development Coalition would have a lot more focused questions on housing, but whatever, what are they going to do? I still stand that Michelle Wu is the only progressive in the race. I think Andrea is great with police. However, you got to be a champion of rent control. You got to be willing to say abolish the BPDA because this is the easy part. Wait until the actual pressure happens when you're sitting in the seat.